dethrones the Reg in the World Series at New Smyrna. And finally, Curtis Markham has the right invitation to win at Volusia. From high atop the towers from Daytona International Speedway in Daytona Beach, Florida, another edition of Race Week begins as we take a continued look at Speed Week's 1990, the most spectacular week in motorsports racing. Hello, I'm Ben Dodge, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Race Week. Well, in this edition of Race Week, the story from the Daytona International Speedway is a setting that starts to build to the granddaddy of them all, the Daytona 500. In addition to that, we'll be taking a look at more of the best in short track competition from the New Smyrna Speedway, Volusia County, and a whole lot more. But right now, the racing action begins right here from beautiful sunny Florida as we take a look at the twin 125s and all the events building to the Daytona 500. Some say that the twin 125 qualifying races are the best races of Speed Week. Speeds in excess of 190 miles an hour were pretty much the story. It was Ken Schrader in row number 1, Darrell Waltrip to the outside row, then Mark Martin and Jeff Bodine, Sterling Marling, and Richard Petty. But the strategy for some was different than others. As the field was already preparing to anticipate the green, the strategy of young rookie competitor Rob Moroso was to go to the pits, top off the fuel. Hopefully, this topping would give him enough fuel to go the distance. The Crown team was back in the position when Ken Schrader and Darrell Waltrip would wind it up tight and look for the green. Sterling Marling was also looking strong as the field went to green. But no question about it, Waltrip would already start to string it out just a bit. It was Waltrip and Schrader side by side, Martin in the hunt and Jeff Bodine not far behind. Schrader would take advantage of the inside and pick up the lead. Then it was Mark Martin who'd quickly move into second, with Waltrip patiently waiting in the wing. The Kodiak car was out in front, but Rob Moroso, his day would suddenly end as he'd head back to the pits. But back to the racing surface, there was more great racing action going on. To the excitement of the race fans, King Richard Petty was turning in one of his best runs in quite some time. The King was on a roll, and the fans love it. Richard Petty was in command once again at the high banks of Daytona, and Waltrip was hunting him down. Schrader was right there as a factor, and Martin was not letting any of the three get out of his sight. But the story would be more stories to be told, not on the racetrack, but on pit road. King Richard Petty would lead the parade of heavy hitters to the pits. Petty was fueling up and preparing for a big victory at Daytona. But so wasn't the Kodiak team as Schrader would rejoin in the competition. But Petty would squeak by first. Then Waltrip would come out of the pits in hot pursuit of Schrader. Ricky Rudd was trying to stretch the mileage and the fuel, but the strategy wouldn't pay off. The Lumina would not go the distance. But for Jeff Bodine, just enough fuel as he would set the pace. When suddenly, in the final circuit of competition, it was Ken Schrader and Hud Strickland who'd come together. While all this was happening on the racetrack, down on pit road, Ricky Rudd was looking to get some fuel. But back to the checker, it was Jeff Bodine in the Budweiser 11 to hold on and secure the impressive victory. Finishing in the runner-up spot was Harry Gant, and rounding out the top three was Mark Martin. The victory was worth $34,000. The first win for Junior Johnson and Jeff Bodine at Daytona.
That's what we needed to do today to win. We knew that. Tim and Terry Labonte won this race last year the same way. Sunday, we know we're going to have to step it up a little bit. We'll change the gear, speed us up, get a new fresh engine in there. And Sunday, we'll be up front leading some of those laps and hopefully back here in Victory Lane.
There's a familiar car in front of you. What do you think about that with Ricky Rudd?
Well, you know, when I saw him run out of gas, I said, Ricky, I know how you feel, boy. It hurts, but it felt good to me.
The second 125 qualifier was just as exciting as the first, as Dale Earnhardt and Bill Elliott would make up the front row. Neil Bonnet and Phil Parsons would make up row number 2, and it was Rick Wilson and Dick Trickle to make up row number 3. Earnhardt would stand on the throttle of the black machine to start to pull away. Bill Elliott would move into contend, but then the story was Dick Trickle. as he'd work the inside groove as Phil Parsons would patiently wait on the bottom and look to move into position number 2. Suddenly, it was Mark Stahl who would get crossed up and get out of shape. He'd managed to gather it back, and then the story would be told approaching the pits. It appeared that Trickle was going to the pit area. Last-minute strategy, a cat-and-mouse game here. Then suddenly the heavy hitters were now down on pit road. It was Terry Labonte and Dale Earnhardt, Bill Elliott in the pits, and Davey Allison. The strategy was who'd be the quickest out of the pits, and Elliott and Earnhardt were looking good. But when the field was back to green, it was a surprise to some for Dick Trickle to command their attention. Jim Spencer had worked his way to the front of the field, and he was just as impressive. Earnhardt was coming on strong, and so wasn't Elliott, as Cope was stuck in the middle as they thread their way back to the front of this field. But it was Earnhardt who seemed to muscle up the most steam. He was now on the back bumper of Dick Trickle, and Jim Spencer was giving Bill Elliott a run for the money. As the 4 cars would draft impressively, Earnhardt would get squeaked to the bottom, then pick up the spot. It was Jim Spencer and Dick Trickle who would dance for a while, but suddenly a different story was told. Trickle would run out of gas. He'd slide through the center of the infield, and Elliott and the group would manage to squeak on by. Trickle's day had ended. No gas, the story here. But for Dale Earnhardt, there was plenty of gas to hold on to win the second Twin 125 qualifier. Finishing in second was Bill Elliott over Jim Spencer. Earnhardt's victory was worth $34,000.
It was a gamble to put 4 tires on, with everybody else just getting a little gas, but it was a gamble that paid off because Elliott got 4 tires, and I don't think I could have beat him without them, so that's what it's all about.
He ran out of gas and come down there, and man, I hated it. I just barely nudged him just enough to turn him around there, and there was nothing I could do. And that's a bad situation, you know, when you get in a position like that. We're running so close.
Once again, if that last caution didn't come out and Earnhardt and Elliott didn't get the chance to put fresh tires on, we could have beat them. But that's racing, and, you know, I'm happy to get third. I think we're starting in the top 10 in the 500. That's a dream come true for this team. And I think that if we can do that in Daytona 500 Sunday, that's something, man.
Up next was the 32nd annual Goodies 300 for the Busch Grand Nationals. Heavy favorites like Darrell Waltrip were already in the starting lineup. But for the fans of the Northeast, the story was Mike McLaughlin. He had qualified among the quickest, but had wrecked in practice. But still, this team just didn't give up.
It's been a real trying week, I'll tell you that. Put everybody to the test. We had motor problems initially, and then switch motors, qualified 14th. And driver error put us in the fence. We spent, well, 2 days, 15, 20 people, 15 hours a day, put the car back together. Funny, it took me 2 months to do what we did in 2 days, but car's back together. I run alone, and it felt decent, you know. I haven't yet been back in the draft, so we're going to be a little cautious right off the bat.
You guys had a lot of help from some of the other crews. That's kind of a heartwarming thing to see, is that people pitch in and help you when you need a hand.
Everybody's been more than helpful. The Morosos, just everybody in general. You know, the Bodines, Todd Bodine, he was over there helping Hank in sheet metal, and people loaning us welders and torches and front nose pieces, anything we needed. It just makes you feel good to think that, you know, it's not as bad as they say about the North and the South. They're all just good people.
You've called this a one-shot deal for yourself and the Grieche team. It was almost the end of that one-shot deal. What's going to happen after today? Does this give you the spirit to maybe continue in the Busch Grand National ranks?
Well, let's just wait and see what happens here today. It's, you know, we're playing it all by ear. I mean, it feels like we've already run about six, 7 shows. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens. I feel confident that we can do it. I'll tell you one thing for sure, the crew and everybody deserves it.
And there was no question about it that this was one team that deserved even more than just credit. As the field went to post, it was Darrell Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt in row number 1. Bobby Labonte and Tom Peck would make up the second row with Brad Teague and Jim Hensley. Initially in the start, Hensley would look strong to the inside and take over position number 1. But Earnhardt wouldn't let things get out of his sight, as Waltrip was also considered a factor in the hunt. But Hensley was certainly among the stars of this show. Then there was a new challenge. Bobby Labonte would try to work the inside, and hopefully it would pay off. Steve Grissom was stuck in the middle, and Earnhardt was hung out to dry on the outside. But once broken through, it was Earnhardt who was starting to pull away. Then on lap number 13, perhaps the biggest crash of them all, involving 23 automobiles, the second biggest wreck in the history of Daytona. It involved front runners like Darrell Waltrip, Kyle Petty, L.D. Ottinger, Steve Grissom, and more. And even Mike McLaughlin would find himself in this mix-up. His crew would again have no luck at all in their first trip to Daytona.
We were loose. We were just trying to conserve so we could get in and try and make an adjustment. And that happened. There was smoke. I couldn't see anything. If I would have made it through, it would have been luck, because I had no idea where I was going. I just pulled to the bottom of the track, and I collected, I don't know who it was.
Yeah, it is. He's got to give these guys a lot of credit here. They worked real hard to get the car back in shape. Everybody else probably would have loaded up and gone home. I just give them all credit. Mike's a hard worker, and he's a hard driver, and hey, it's just a bad day at the beach.
When it was back to speed, it was Dale Earnhardt who'd set the pace. But Greg Sachs would give him a run for the money in the City Chevrolet. Number 46 as Sachs would take over the lead. But there was no doubt about it that Earnhardt would take it back. And the new factor became Dale Jarrett, as he was a contender too. And suddenly, late in the event, in the closing stages, it was Harry Gant who'd move to the inside and pick up the spot, but Earnhardt would hold on to secure the impressive victory. It was Harry Gant who'd finishing second. Greg Sachs would round out the top three, and Jim Hensley would finish in the fourth spot, just ahead of Elton Sawyer. It was Earnhardt's second victory of Speed Week. The only thing left would be the Daytona 500. And now it was time for the biggest payday in motorsports racing. The Daytona 500 had finally arrived. All the best were assembled in the starting grid. And even the Northeast's own Jimmy Spencer would share how he would start in the 6th position.
I'm pitching myself to make sure it's true. I tell you, the guys really worked hard all week, all winter long, to tell you the truth. And to be third row, I mean, it's quite an honor. And we're hoping we can do as good as we did Thursday. We got the car about where we thought we had it Thursday, and the car's been driving real good. And we're hoping we can make a reality out of this thing and run in the top 10 all day. And that's our main concern right now.
For Kenny Schrader, he knew he was setting in the front row, but he'd have to start this event in 41st.
Well, the car's running off good. You know, we got to wind up starting 41st instead of first, but we'll just have to see. It's a long race.
And for Ken Schrader, he'd have all the right ingredients to do it from the back of the pack. But the field was now prepared and ready for racing. It was Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Bodine, Bill Elliott and Harry Gant, Jim Spencer and Mark Martin, Phil Parsons and Darrell Waltrip, Bobby Hillen and Richard Petty as the field would go to green. It was Jeff Bodine who'd run at the front of the class, but it would be short-lived as Dale Earnhardt would step the pace and take over position number 1. Then suddenly King Richard Petty would get out of shape. No real severe damage done, but enough to take Petty out of the hunt for another impressive victory at Daytona. But back at the front of the field, it was Elliott who'd run the bottom, and Schrader was coming to life as he would thread the needle and work his way to the front. Earnhardt was holding on. Elliott was on a roll. Then a mix-up would occur. Alan Kowicki, Rob Moroso, Phil Parsons, and Mike Alexander were involved. No severe damage done, but enough to take them out of the competition here. But back up front, it was Derek Cope who'd muscled up some steam to take over the number 1 spot. Mark Martin was also on a roll, and Earnhardt was looking good when suddenly down on pit road, Ken Schrader had pulled back behind the wall. An engine problem would be the story. But out on the racetrack, the strongest engine in the field was definitely Earnhardt's number 3. As he would string it out, Rick Wilson would develop a problem and drop oil on the racetrack, causing a caution late in the event. This would tighten things back up. But when it went back to green, Earnhardt was out in front and pulling away in the closing laps of the event. Suddenly, a tire would go down. Derek Cope had taken over the lead. And right there on his back bumper was Terry Labonte, with Bill Elliott waiting patiently in the wing. But there was no question about it. The upset of the day would be the fact that Derek Cope would win the Daytona 500. An exciting, deserving crew was waiting for him to head to victory lane.
I'll tell you, I've dreamed about this. I really felt like this team coming in here had a shot to win this thing. And I told Buddy this morning, you know, I said, hey, if I can stay out of trouble and I can be patient, you know, I can put this thing in a position to win a race. And Buddy felt that way too. We tried to keep the spoiler down so we could run with Earnhardt. He was awful tough, and we just could never stick with him. But like I said, we were in a position to win there, and I had my nose stuck up his rear end so far there. And when that thing blew, I just couldn't believe it.
Some may call it destiny, while others would call it fate. Then there's a group would say it was just good luck. But there's no question about it. The record books will show that Derek Cope has won the Daytona 500. And hats off, and credit has to be given where credit is due. Bob Whitcomb from Keene, New Hampshire, has made the right choice, and all of New Hampshire is proud, because now Derek Cope and the Whitcomb team have won the Daytona 500. Well, next we'll be taking a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be taking a look at short track racing, this time where many a competitor has the same dreams of Derek Cope to someday to win the Daytona 500. Welcome back to Race Week. Last week where we left off in the competition was Monday night, and the World Series is still continuing on. The point battle is starting to get heated up. Tony Jankowiak and Eddie DeHaan are running up front of the point standings, and Reggie Ruggiero and Tom Baldwin have visited Victory Lane, but both have different plans. There's a 50 and a 100-lap event with double points coming up. The surprise in the competition has been Jankowiak and DeHaan, but Ruggiero is moving back in, and Tom Baldwin is looking to move on. The field was ready for another night of competition. It was the 13th, and Mickey Murillo would be starting to the inside of Richard Savory. As the field came off the fourth turn, Murillo and Savory would make up the front row and head into turn number 1. The battle was on, and Richard Savory would stand on the throttle and start to pull away. DeHaan would get hung out to dry on the outside. As Reggie Ruggiero would work in the second, it would be Tony Jankowiak up to 3. Then DeHaan would fight back to the outside groove as Ruggiero would start to string it out and pull away. George Greco would spin off turn number 4 to bring out a caution late in the event. But back at the front of the field, Tomeno and car number 99 for Jankowiak would come together. Tomeno would cut a tire, and Jankowiak would have to come from the back of the pack. Tomeno had once again met with misfortune and hard luck. But back up front, it was Jankowiak to run strong. Ruggiero was running in second, DeHaan was up to third, and Savory had now worked his way back to position number 4. It was then a battle for the lead. The Reg was on the outside. He'd set the pace. Jankowiak was right there on his back bumper as DeHaan would finish in position number 3. It was Reggie Ruggiero into the winner's circle once again. Junior Hanley and Steve Knowlton bobbled a bit initially on the start as Hanley would start to pull away at the front of the field. But the story was another battle shaping up at the front of the pack. Dave Rogers was threading the needle to get to the front of this field. Tim Fetta was trying to hold on the inside as Knowlton would work him impressively in the outside groove. The two would battle lap after lap, and Rogers was right there as a factor with car number 11. But there was no question about it. The pride of Canada was setting the pace, and he'd hold on to take down the impressive victory. Finishing in second was David Rogers over Tim Fetterwood to round out the top 3. In the Pro 4 division, it was Mike Stacy who was coming to the front of this field with ease with car number 22. He would hold on to take down the victory over George Savory. The next night of competition saw Reggie Ruggiero to set in the winner's circle to secure yet another victory. And Junior Hanley would do it once again in the late models over Dennis Lambin and Pete Orr. This was Junior Hanley's 4th win in 5 events. On Thursday night, the series would take a new tone. It was George Greco and Eddie DeHaan initially on the start. DeHaan would set the pace at the front of the field for a while, but Ruggiero and Tony Jankowiak would make contact. Jankowiak would squeak on by and set the pace on in front, as DeHaan and Ruggiero would battle lap after lap for position number 3. It was Jay Hedgecock who was now up to second, but the battle was on for third. The Reg would set in the number 3 spot. DeHaan would hunt him down when Hedgecock would drop off the pace. But it was Tony Jankowiak in command of this event, and he would impressively set the pace out front. But for DeHaan, the battle was on with Tom Baldwin and Jeff Fuller hunting him down for position number 3. But soon the checkered would wave, and it would be Jankowiak to set the pace to win the event. Second was Reggie Ruggiero, and third was Eddie DeHaan over Tom Baldwin and Jeff Fuller. Jankowiak had set in victory lane. The competition was just as impressive on Thursday night in the late models, too. Tim Fetta was looking good when all of a sudden Wayne Anderson would get crossed up with car number 74X. Involved in the mix-up was Mike Kelly with a 7, Robbie Thompson, and Guy Heller with car number 19. This would create a caution, and when things got grouped back together and it was time to go racing once again, Steve Knowlton and Tim Fetta were giving them a run for the money at the front of this field. Junior Hanley was also a factor in this event. And moving to the front was Pete Orr with car number 36. But it was Knowlton who looked like a sure contender to visit victory lane. But Junior Hanley would go to the outside, and Awesome Power would decide who would have position number 1. It was Junior Hanley in command of the event once again. He'd hold on to take down the victory. Pete Orr in for second, and Dennis Lampman to round out the top three. In the Pro 4 division, it was Gary Ebling who was holding off Mike Stacy at the front of the field. Ebling was looking like a sure contender to secure his first victory when all of a sudden a lapped automobile would create a problem. Robbie Clark would slam the wall hard. Gary Ebling had dropped out of the event, and Tim Bainey was involved with car number 5. But as the field was under red, it was Mike Stacy who'd have a talk with the officials, and Stacy was told to go to the back of the pack. In the final laps of competition, it was Kurt Halbert who'd set the pace to take down the win. On Friday night, it was a 100-lap event for the late models. A full house of race fans came out to witness this event. Pete Orr would be starting to the inside of Ray Skillman with car number 16. As the field would go to green, a battle was already starting to develop at the front of this field. It was car number 8 for Russ Erlin who was trying to work the inside when early leader Ray Skillman would drop off the pace with car number 16. Sparks would fly, and just as Skillman would pull out of the event with the number 16, a new battle was developing right up front. Steve Knowlton was trying to hold off Tim Fedowa, but Junior Hanley was threading the needle. As Leroy Porter was hunting him down, it was Hanley who'd moved to the inside of Steve Knowlton to pick up position number 2. It was Pete Orr who was setting the pace at the front of this field. Hanley was reeling him in, and Knowlton was running in position number 3. When a caution would come out due to weather conditions as the rain had started to fall. This would send the fans back to their cars as heavy rains had once again come for another night of competition at New Smyrna. As the field was now under caution, but once back to green, it was Junior Hanley who dominated the racing action at the front of this field as he would literally start to pull away. Russ Erlin would try a late event charge with no luck as Steve Knowlton would drop off the pace with car number 88X. But to this checker, the story was being told. It was Junior Hanley to take down the win. Leroy Porter to finish in second, Tim Fedowa was third, Pete Orr for fourth, and Russ Erlin to round out the top 5. In the modified division, the battle was on to get to the front when Eddie DeHunt was coming to the front when Jensen would lose a motor and Amon was hung out to dry out of the oil on the outside. But the story was not the same for car number 07 as Vic Moore would end up in the oil. Reggie Ruggiero and Tony Jankowiak were dialed in and heading to the front of this field. The Reg was on a roll, and Jankowiak was reeling him down. With less than one circuit to go, it was Ruggiero into the winner's circle. In for second was Tony Jankowiak, followed by Eddie DeHunt. And now it was time for the final modified event of the series, the Richie Evans Memorial 100-lap event. Jankowiak was leading the points over DeHunt and Ruggiero going in, and the battle was on right from the start. Jankowiak would run the bottom. The Reg would run the outside. He'd set the pace in the outside groove. Then Hedgecock would come to life, and he'd take over position number 1. It was Jay Hedgecock, the pride of the South, to set the pace. Ruggiero was running in second when all of a sudden a spin would occur. Jeff Fuller would cut a tire and go around with car number 00. Then the engine would literally go up in smoke. And down on pit road, the Reg was in the pits. Tires would be the story, but Ruggiero would lose one lap in the pit area. But back to green flag conditions on the racetrack. The leader of the field was Jay Hedgecock. Ruggiero would make up his lap, but still have a long way to go to come back to the front of this field. It was still Jay Hedgecock in command. Tony Jankowiak was still running a close second, but Jay Hedgecock would hold on to take down the win. Finishing in second was Tony Jankowiak, with Eddie DeHunt to finish in third. Tony Jankowiak would win the overall series over Eddie DeHunt with Reggie Ruggiero in third. Initially on the start in the late models, there was trouble right from the beginning as Dennis Lampman would go around with car number 9X. Leroy Porter would be involved, one of the front runners in the competition. Then Russ Erlin would get out of shape, spin and do a 360, and somehow be okay with car number 8. But back at the front of the field, it was Junior Hanley to set the pace at the front of the track, as this event would turn into a real sleeper. Hanley would set the pace and hold on to win his 7th out of 8 events in the series. Finishing in second was car number 8 for Russ Erlin, and finishing in third was Pete Orr. Well, next we'll be taking a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be taking a look at more short track racing as we visit the NASCAR Winston Racing Series action from Volusia County Speedway right after Sunday night, Volusia County Speedway would host the first annual Winston Invitational, an event that would pay $50,000 in overall purse and $10,000, which would be the magnetic attraction that would track these competitors by invitation only. The very best from several different regions and racetracks from across the country. It was Larry Phelps to the inside of the front row, Dave Hiatus outside of row number 1, John Livingston and Barry Beggerly with Kevin Noodleman and Kevin Stivers. No question about it, it was John Livingston who'd already start to make the inside lane work as he would literally start to pull away. The challenge was already on. Then suddenly Noodleman would get crossed up and go around. Involved in the mix-up was Kevin Stivers with car number 25 and the number 95 of Robert Hoffman. The 25 of Kevin Stivers would show the worst of the wear as it was double hooked back to the pits. On a roll back to the front of the field, Barry Beggerly would work the inside groove to take back position number 1. Beggerly was on a roll and setting the pace at the front of the field. Lap traffic with Barry Beggerly as David Blankenship would use the lapped automobiles to his advantage to take over the lead. And Curtis Markham was following through with car number 4. Now Markham would make a bid for the lead down beneath Blankenship. It was Markham out in front with the Skyline number 4. He'd set the pace and try to hold on in the closing laps of competition. Car number 4 would be the man that would secure the $10,000 victory for Curtis Markham. David Blankenship in for second over Larry Beggerly to finish third. The Daytona 500 is now over, and they're cleaning up and clearing out from the Daytona International Speedway as the competitors are already heading down the road to Richmond, their next stop for the excitement of racing. Well, that's going to kind of wrap things up for this edition of Race Week. We congratulate all of our winners from the Daytona International Speedway, and you know, to sum it up, perhaps the best note we can make, that 1990, a new decade in motorsports, is getting kicked off with something kind of new. It appears that already the 90s are beginning with the underdogs looking like the heroes in the competition. We saw Terrence Toth win the Daytona 500. At the New Smyrna Speedway, Tony Jankowiak win the series. And Curtis Markham, who won the Invitational race at Volusia County. Well, that's going to kind of wrap things up for this edition of Race Week. On the next edition of Race Week, we'll bring you more great racing excitement from the South and the North as we continue to bring you the best in motorsports coverage. Well, it's time for us to pack our gear up and head back north to prepare for another edition of Race Week. Until then, we say take care. We'll see you again next time for the best in motorsports right here with us on Race Week. Take care. Bye-bye now.